There are projects where you just need Squarespace's product pages to handle multiple item previews with different aspect ratios. Photography and art portfolios are the kind of sites that come to mind, but there are many other instances where this ability may come in handy. However, since Squarespace doesn't provide the option natively, at least at the time I'm recording this, let's use some CSS to code the heck out of it and obtain something like this. For this tutorial, I'm going to be using 7.1 and my product page is going to be set to the grid layout here. If you want to, you can pause the video to check out the other options I'm using in case you want to replicate the same design, but you don't really need them to achieve this modification. All right, so let's jump right into it. First, we need to see what is forcing the current crop. It can be the aspect ratio property, it can be the padding method, or it could be something else completely. Regardless, we still need to find out what that is in order to be able to override it. If we inspect one of our images here, we'll see that the image element itself is set to position absolute. So this is an absolutely positioned element that has a height and a width of 100%. In general, what this means is that the height and the width is being given by one of the containers holding the element. It's not the element itself that it's setting its own dimensions. So knowing this, if we look at the parent container, here on the right side, we can clearly see that we have the aspect ratio property set to a variable. And that variable carries the value of the option we have set through the product's page settings. In my case, that's 1:1 because I chose the square aspect ratio, but in your case, that could be a different number. Now, if we were to change this to something else, like for example, 3/4, you're going to see how the images on the screen resize themselves and now have a different crop. So basically what this means is that what we need to do is substitute this aspect ratio value inside our custom CSS window to be able to implement our modification. Now, since what we're trying to do is overwrite something or just change the value that this property carries, the easiest way to go about this is to simply reuse the selector that Squarespace is already using to set the original value. This is going to help us avoid as much friction as possible when it comes to updating the code. So let's grab this here and add it inside our custom CSS window. And now to test things out, I'm going to go ahead and set the aspect ratio to 3/4. So perfect, we can see that that works correctly, and now we can go ahead and set up our new value. Now there are pretty much two ways to do this. One way is to, again, just change the aspect ratio property to a fixed value of our choice. And the second route is to actually substitute the value that the variable carries. In my case, I'm going to stick with this method, and now what I'm going to do is just use the value of auto to be able to remove the crop entirely from the images. So once I have my auto set in there, you're going to see that there's definitely something happening on the screen. It's just not quite what we want to do. So if you're wondering why the images disappear, that has to do with that absolute position that we saw before that the image carries. Basically what's happening is that the image is right now taking on the dimensions of its container. But because we've set the container to have an aspect ratio of auto, the container is trying to have the size of the image. In other words, nobody's really sizing anybody right now. So to fix it, we're going to target the image element itself. So this image element that we have here within that grid image wrapper container. And we're going to change its position from absolute to relative. So let's go ahead and do that here. I'm going to be nesting here my selectors. So now I'm going to target the image that is sitting within the grid image wrapper, within the product list item image, within the product list item link, within the product list item, within the product list container. So basically, I'm writing the same thing as this. It's just a little shortcut to this. So I'm going to remove that, and then here for the image, we're going to give this a position of relative. So what this is going to do is allow the image to display its native aspect ratio, and because we already have the aspect ratio of its parent container set to auto, then basically we don't have a crop happening anymore. Awesome, so here we can see that we have all of our images showing up with their corresponding aspect ratio. However, let's go ahead and check out the live side just a quick minute. So here I'm going to refresh the page to load the code that we currently have inside the custom CSS window. And you're going to see that the same modification is not quite applying here at all. Now, without getting into too much detail, what's happening here is that the original code that is setting that aspect ratio of 1, at least in my case in this test page, is currently overriding the little snippet that we added inside the custom CSS window. Now, even though our selector is exactly the same as the one that Squarespace was using, the problem is that Squarespace's file is loading after the custom CSS window file. And the browser is simply taking this value as the real one. So it's the one that it's implementing. To fix this, we can either make our selector more robust by adding more classes or an ID, or simply use the important rule in our value. For the sake of time, I'm just going to go with the latter fix, but do know that usually modifying the selector is a best practice. So let's go ahead and go back into our code. I'm going to go into my auto value, and I'm going to set this to important. Here inside the edit mode, nothing is really going to happen because the code was applying here anyway. But now if I go onto the live side and I refresh this, you're going to see how now the code does apply. So there we go. Now everything is working correctly, and if what you wanted to do is allow each product image to display as its natural self, then you're all set. However, if you also want to readjust the spacing so that everything flows a little bit better and more masonry-like, make sure to subscribe to my channel since we'll be doing that next week. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and until next time.